Hello. My critical analysis paper was sort of a bit of a wild goose chase, as Nick knows, because I had to do an emergency office hour with her to try to get myself on track. I started out, someone had recommended the podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, to me. I didn't know anything about it. I had never heard anything before about it. I started listening to it and I thought, um, it, this is very compelling, but it felt like I was missing a big part of the picture. The part I realized that I was missing was actually hearing from autistic people themselves, specifically because of what the podcast is about, nonverbal autistic people. I couldn't, I kept looking for opinions online. I couldn't find anything. And so I ended up kind of in this very circular thing where I found other podcasts. I kept thinking, maybe this is what I'll write my paper about. Maybe I'll write it about this. And I just couldn't get on track. Um, Speaking with Nick really helped me because she said, just answer the questions that I gave you. And that really helped. Um, and so that sort of led me to a friend of mine said, I'm in this Facebook group that is, it's a place for non-autistic people to ask questions of autistic people, and only autistic people are allowed to answer. She said, I think you might find some good stuff there. Um, I hadn't been on Facebook in a very long time, but it ended up being a wonderful group. And I was able to use the search function and look for the telepathy tapes. One of the things that happens in the telepathy tapes is people or non-autistic adults are using facilitated communication with non-speaking autistic people. And so in the conversations I found on Facebook, someone specifically said, if you want to learn more about facilitated communication, this documentary is excellent. It is old and it's very outdated in the ways that it talks about autistic people, but I think it could be a very helpful watch for most people. As soon as I heard the title of the documentary, I thought, I think this is what my paper is about. The title is Prisoners of Silence. This documentary is from it was a Frontline episode actually in 1993, and what I wrote my paper about was the way that autistic people are spoken about in it. The show outlines the rise and fall at the time of facilitated communication in the early 90s, um, and the assumptions that the documentary makes about autistic people. It's like really intense, some of it to see. It's absolutely uncritical acceptance of the pathology paradigm. Autism is referred to as a strange condition with no cure. They repeatedly wonder what's wrong with autistic people or autistic children in this instance. Um, they say things like no one knows what's going on inside their heads, which really spoke to the idea that we learned about cognitive liberty, that no one actually has a right to know or control what's going on inside your head. You get to have autonomy over your own mental space. Um, Another part of it that really stood out to me, there's a clip from a news program where Diane Sawyer is talking about autism as a disorder that turns children both in on themselves and against the world. Um, it it was this assumption of autistic people as isolated, antagonistic, and just reinforce that false dichotomy between neurotypical is healthy and desirable, neurodivergent is broken and tragic. Um, so it was interesting because I was watching this documentary of two minds. One was, this is excellent for my paper. It was very clear, like this is the way that autism was very like commonly spoken about when I was in high school in the 1990s, and this was absolutely the way, and the 1980s too, when I was in elementary school. This is the way that autism was spoken about, incredibly offensive. Luckily, a lot of that is not as common nowadays, but as I watched the documentary, I thought, well, this is still. I think the way that a lot of people think, whether they say it or not. Um, the other lens that I was watching this through was actually trying to learn about facilitated communication. For those who don't know, in the podcast, the telepathy tapes, um, basically a lot of different parents are saying that they feel that their non-speaking autistic children are telepathic, that they can read their parents' mind. I was um, I was definitely my eyebrows were raised about that. It sounded kind of fantastical, but mostly in the way of like I it sounded like a way that non-autistic people could really be taking advantage of autistic children. So most of these adults, not all of them, but most of them are using facilitated communication with their children where they hold up a board and the child uses a pen or different instruments to tap at letters, or they have their own device that maybe the parent holds. In the documentary that I watched, or in this Prisoners of Silence, one of the things I want to say, one of the things that was actually quite good about it, and you can find this on YouTube if you'd like to watch it, is that they have all these parents and teachers and different adults, very well-meaning, who are using facilitated communication with these autistic children, and they end up doing a test because there are a few people who are critical that this is really happening. So they do a test where the adult is sitting on one side of a wall, the child is sitting on the other. They can sit next to each other, but they're both looking forward, and there's a sign that they each see. Sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's a different thing, but they're not allowed to see each other's. And in every single test, the child would type what the adult was seeing, not what the child was seeing. So even though the adult was not aware of it, they were moving the board very subtly to have the child press what they wanted them to press. The really interesting thing was that the adults did not know this was happening. What I really appreciated was that there was one woman specifically, a teacher, who said, I was completely wrong. I was wrong about this. I thought that something was happening. It wasn't. I feel horrible. And you really don't hear people apologize like that anymore or admit to being wrong. So it was kind of refreshing. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But what I came to was realizing that one of the things that I had been looking for from the very beginning, commentary from non-speaking autistic people, which I was finally able to find in that group, and the person who had posted the video for Prisoners of Silence said this was a non speaking autistic person who had written about this episode. And he said it would be so simple for the podcast hosts to do this test. It's a very simple test. It tells you right away whether it's the parents doing the communication or the children. And that was sort of like I felt like I had found what I was looking for from the beginning, which was a non-speaking autistic person's perspective on this podcast that is talking about them, right? But we're not actually asking them what they think of it. Um, and the issue was that possibly this podcast is looking more to get money, um, to get clicks than they are to actually make sure the most important thing that these autistic children are being treated properly and respected. I want to say that some people do use facilitated communication, and it's often a, an excellent way for them to end up communicating on their own without needing assistance. And I'm not saying that none of the children in the telepathy tapes are not speaking for themselves, but just that this whole goose chase that I went on really hit home for me the ways that non-autistic or non-speaking autistic people are not allowed to actually represent themselves. I think this went a little long. Sorry. Thank you so much for listening.